Can you gonna show me on? Oh, I don't need to get on the phone.
So, yeah.
Just testing. Can you hear me now? This is Camila. No, I didn't. Can I be heard? Okay.
I can hear you. Camila, I can hear you. This is Lavetta Levels.
Thank you, Lavetta.
Chance? Well, I have 6:09 and call to order the December 15th meeting. Citizens Election Advisory Committee. Can't hear him? Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3, test. You guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Eric, we can hear you. You're just gonna have to speak up a little louder.
Yes. Yeah, this time I'd ask Esmeralda, if you would, do roll call.
Saying something.
Heard Camila, Lavetta.
I can do roll call if you'd like. Okay. And I guess I apologize for the question, but I have a list of virtual attendants. I'll just call out the names that I see here. And then for the people in the room, Eric, if you can help me go around to make sure that I've captured everybody that's sitting there. Would that work?
That'll work.
Okay, so I'm not counting Michael Scarpello or Esmeralda. I'm not sure about Aaron White. Is Aaron White on the SEAC or is he with the staff?
He's with the staff.
Okay, so I have Alana. Alana, are you with us?
Yes, I'm.
And what was that, Eric?
I couldn't hear you. You cut out that last sentence.
Oh, okay, but I think I got a response that Alana, and what's your last name, Alana, just to record it?
Collins.
Okay, so I have Alana Collins. Then I have Ana Coca. Are you with us?
Presente, here.
Presente, thank you. And then I have Chance.
That's staff. Both of them are
That's staff. Okay, thank you. Then I have Elaine Campbell.
Camila, I'm sorry, just do the committee members, Camila.
Oh, committee members?
Yeah, just the committee members. We see to determine whether or not we have a quorum, but do tell us who of the committee members are online and present here.
Okay, maybe I need more guidance in that. Are you talking about for the subcommittees or?
You know what, Camila, we'll go ahead and do that here, because I think we have that information, so we'll do the roll call from here, okay?
That might be better then. Sorry about that.
No problem. If you would, Esmeralda, would you take the roll?
Mildred Dominic.
Present.
Elaine Campbell. Elaine Campbell. Villa Correa Bordeaux.
Present.
Present.
de los Santos,
Present.
Lavera Levels,
Present.
Alexis Denard,
Present.
Lawrence Weiner, Connie Wells, Walter Combines, John Michael Yours, John Michael Yours, John Eric Cedillo,
Present.
Elaine and then you know that she's outlined regarding audio.
And Esmeralda, if you would, could you declare whether or not the legal notice was posted for this meeting?
yes, legal notice has been posted, public notice.
Okay, we get right into the topics for discussion. I think our first topic for discussion is the Secretary of State audit of the 2020 elections. Mr. Scarpella?
Good evening, everyone. It's been a busy time. I've got a lot of things to cover. So I'll probably go quickly, but please feel free to stop me and ask questions later.
Could you please speak up, Mr. Scarpello?
Thank you, Match down.
Yeah. Yeah. So as you all know, there was a notice of the Secretary of State's forensic audit. It was basically published online before we knew about it. And so then we heard about it about the same time as everyone else. But then we got a visit from Secretary of State John Scott. He visited our office shortly thereafter. We had a very nice, pleasant visit, kind of discussed in general terms what the audit was going to be all about. Then we've got, just recently, we've got a letter notifying officially DCD of phase 2 of the audit. And so that has been included as a handout, so you guys have it. Fairly long document. And it really kind of breaks the audit down into 2 phases. There's a short list of asks that will be presented to the Secretary of State's office by December 21st, mostly consisting of typical Canvas documents, but then there's some other asks that we're going to have to take a look at and see how difficult they're going to be for us to get. But our intention is to be fully cooperative on all of these things to the full extent that we're required to by the law. The next phase will be in January. It's going to start in January. And apparently the Secretary of State has announced that they're going to be doing on site. If you look on page 1 through 10, it's going to talks about all the level of detail of the things that they want to look at. Some of these things are difficult, what we find in our normal Canvas documents, and some of them go way beyond. So we're in discussions with the DA's, the civil division of the DA's office, as well as the other 3 counties, to kind of discuss, our response to this audit and our level of participation. But our intent is to be as cooperative as possible. But having said that, we have more questions than answers at this point. And I can tell you that this is big. This is a huge distraction from us doing our preparing for the March primary elections and the 2 main countywide May elections. So we're very concerned. Very concerned that this is looking backwards instead of looking forward. And just to look forward and to conduct elections as best as possible in Dallas County. So we'll see, and we'll just kind of see how it goes.
Do you have any questions regarding the audit?
I understand what you're saying like, we don't want to say mistakes or even better. We don't want to say things.
Did you say that for election administrators, you're getting the process?
Yeah, yeah.
We couldn't hear what Bonnie was saying.
Spoken with them about an actual get-together meeting. This information.
They are currently reviewing.
We couldn't hear what Bonnie was saying and Lawrence.
I was just saying that although I realize this is a lot of work, a lot of paperwork, I'm prepared to go through that in case they find something that, you know, we really need to correct. We don't need to do the same process. We want to keep making the same.
Are you guys able to hear me now? This is Elaine Campbell.
You can, Elaine.
Yes,
Okay,
Elaine,
great.
we can hear.
So I am present. Sorry, I had to restart my computer, but I've been here. So I'm here now. Thank you.
This is Bonnie again. I was just saying, while I understand this is a lot of work for this department, it's necessary so we don't repeat any mistakes, or so we can always improve. We're always looking for. You don't want to see work we're doing this work, but we want to make sure we're doing right procedures.
And I guess that's my concern. It kind of feels like a lot of busy.
Just check it out.
Time is not real great with all the other things you have in your budget, so.
Yeah.
And everybody, if you would, that's listening online, if you guys want to ask a question or make a statement in some way, just go ahead and preface it with your name so you know who's talking from now on. I have one last question and query for you, Michael. In terms of the information being requested, I know there's a lot of it, and I'm not asking you to be particularized in terms of your response, but generally from what they usually ask you to this audit, what are some of the general things that they haven't asked before or don't generally ask after an election?
Well, typically after an election, there's a certain canvas documents that we produce that are the official record of the election. Certainly those are open for anyone to see. I think with this audit goes well beyond. So that's what we're concerned about. Digging through records, asking questions of a staff that frankly wasn't here. Probably 5 of the management staff that conducted the 2020 election. So that's going to make those answers that much more difficult.
Michael, this is
Yeah.
Lavetta Levels. I have a couple of questions. A response of this magnitude, is this a typical second audit that you are accustomed to across the nation?
Well, frankly, this idea of a forensic audit is a new concept. Typically, elections conduct an election, and then sometimes there's a recount, and then sometimes if there's some problems, if someone suspects some problems, there's an election contest by a candidate. This whole concept of forensic audit is a fairly new one that has been kind of foisted upon us recently, and so I don't really know how to answer that question. I don't.
Okay.
Never heard of it.
I appreciate that. Next, because of the breadth and the depth of this request, how do you project this will interfere with the upcoming primary election?
I can tell you that I'm very concerned. As we will see as we go through today's agenda, our staff is incredibly busy preparing for the future, and all the changes that have been foisted upon us by changes in the law, other circumstances where we've made some changes, and so certainly anything that distracts from that could be problematic.
Okay, so do we have an option to delay or not to respond, or respond with we are working on it, but our priority is to ensure, the safety and security of the upcoming primary election. That's the primary activity for Dallas County. Can we respond in that manner and allow this to be secondary and not become primary?
We will certainly respond as we're required by the law, and we will also be as cooperative as we can be beyond the law until it reaches that point where we feel as though that it's going to be problematic for us as far as conducting elections in the region.
Is there any way that we can bill the Secretary of State for the manpower hours that the team will have to exert in order to meet this request?
I think that is one of the questions that we have posed to the district attorney's office, and that's pending an answer.
Thank you.
Any additional questions regarding the audit?
I do. This is Alexis Gennard, District 3. To follow up a little bit more to what Lavetta was speaking to, what happens not only given the time frame that it's close to the spring elections, certainly, we're no stranger what we've seen in the news relative to similar types of audits. What's the financial ramification if there's damage to equipment, et cetera, as a result of whomever's conducting this audit?
I think those are legitimate questions that I don't have answers to right now.
How is it going to be structured in terms of, is everything going to be conducted there on site at the elections building there? What's the construct of this particular audit?
My understanding is that there will be an on-site piece of this audit that the Secretary of State's office will be on site to do some of this work. I couldn't tell you what the balance is between what they're doing in Austin versus what they're doing here.
Any additional questions about the?
Yes, yes, this is Elaine Campbell. I have one question, and apologies if this was already stated while I was rebooting. So I know I've been involved in audits previously in other companies, and I know the importance of, when there is one, for all of the data to be very, very accurate. And sometimes to the point where, as you mentioned, if a group is already busy, that additional resources are required to specifically focus on the audit. Is that something that is being considered to make sure that it's accurate and thorough?
That's once we get our answers from the district attorney's office, give their opinions, we will consult with my bosses, and we will, decide whether or not we need additional resources.
Would it be considered potential that you may need an sample audit support team?
So that's a possibility.
Michael, have you considered reaching out to the state attorney general for an opinion?
Not at this point.
That's after the DA?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Still questions regarding the audit? Okay, we'll move to the next item on the agenda, redistricting and reprecincting update.
So I just want to kind of talk a little bit about redistricting and then subsequent reprecincting. So every 10 years, the Census Bureau conducts the census. Those results usually roll of the odd year after the even year. So this year they would normally come around April. This year, because of the pandemic, those results were pushed back till approximately September. And as a result, the state legislature had to push their timelines back. So instead of normally getting that redistricting done sometime this summer, that was not done until, October or so. And then, in addition to that, so there's 4 districts that the state is responsible for us. And then, in addition to that, Commissioner's Court does the commissioner redistricts the Commissioner Court boundaries, and then the shoot, what's
Moving whole districts,
Yeah.
it'd be extraordinary to move anything less than whole precincts.
Yeah, so they redraw their lines, and so they do 2 different district lines. Someone help me out. I was looking for the Justice of the Peace districts. And so then, after they're all done, they hand those district lines to us. So we got those district lines not too long ago, and what we do is we lay all those lines down in our GIS system. And as our 2 GIS folks back here, Kevin and Ron, very talented. We're fortunate to have 2 GIS folks on staff. So we lay those lines down, and when we from there, those lines when they're laid down, no precinct lines can cross those lines. So those are your kind of your master boundaries of your precinct lines. Then, in theory, we could erase all of the old precinct lines if we wanted to and start from scratch. In discussing this issue with elected leaders, parties, et cetera, the preference was to try to preserve our existing as much as possible. So on top of those 6 district borders, we lay down our also on that same map, our current precinct lines. And then we have to adjust. And so looking at the stats on the screen, we went into this with 798 precincts. And then after everything was all said and done, we ended up with 885. And of those 798, 546 of them didn't change at all. Same numbers, same lines, everything. Some changed, the numbering changed because of the commissioners' lines changed. So 159 of those precincts changed. Maybe something went from number 1 to number 2, or number 2 to number 3, et cetera. Then 110 of those current precinct lines were split. There might have been an existing precinct that a new congressional line went right down the middle of it. So now it became 2 separate precincts. And then 5 precincts were split because they got too big. They became over 5,000 registered voters. So when all was said and done, we've finished our line work. We've finished our precinct numbering. We've handed those to Commissioner's Court. Commissioner's Court is now reviewing them. I hope to have all that feedback from them, and our hope is to have this in front of Commissioner's Court on Tuesday, December 21st, for their approval. Now, the ramifications of all this is that, so we're done fairly fast. That's moving at lightning speed. I mean, 10 years ago, this took months and months. And it was done by an outside agency. This year, we did it internally. I can tell you, all 254 counties have been scrambling to get this precinct work done. And they're scrambling because now the precinct chair elections, which would normally be held in the March primary election, because of the change in the law and pushing back of all these dates by the legislature, those elections will not be held in March. They will be held at the primary runoff election on 24th. And so the filing period for precinct chairs, there were 2 filing periods. There was an early filing period beginning in September and ending December 1st. And that filing period, if someone filed during those times, if they happen to be one of those 546 that weren't affected, they're good. But if they happen to be one of those, if they already filed, one of those in a precinct that changed, then they'll have to refile during the second filing period. And so we're going to be ready. There is another step, though, that this is a very complex process. There's the line work that our GIS people did, but then there's taking all of that information, getting it into our voter registration system, which, how many street segments would you say? How many entries are we talking about, Kevin? Guess. So what Kevin, if you didn't hear, 668,000 individual resident points that we've got to get into our voter registration system. And then that registration system has to, there it's supposed to talk to the state team system, get into that. And so there's some question about whether that's going to be a manual process or whether or not that's going to be an automated process. Hopefully it's an automated process. I can't imagine we have to key those things twice. So we're working on that. Once the line work's done on the 21st, then the rest of that goes through. And then hopefully everybody's ready to go by January 15th for filing for precinct chairs.
And then you've got your responsibility. Well, that's depending on things that have to come before.
Cards have been put by the SOS has pushed that date back. I think it's till January 12th, if I'm correct. That those registration cards will go out. Any questions?
Yeah, Lavetta Levels. Will the Commissioner's Court have to approve these changes prior to releasing?
Yes. Commissioner's Court is officially the ones responsible for setting precinct lines. So until they act officially, I really can't release them.
Okay, so I see that this is being presented to the court on Tuesday. I didn't know it was being presented for approval. Is that correct?
I didn't hear you.
It will be presented to the court for approval.
Correct.
Correct. Thank you.
Additional questions? Okay, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is additional language requirement. Sure.
So by federal law, jurisdiction presents their ballots in English. And by federal law, if there's a certain threshold of voters that speak an alternate language, then by federal law, you have to provide ballots and all of your other election materials in an alternate language. And so in the Dallas County, we have been a Spanish language, English language for years. I don't know when that changed, well before my time. This year when they did the census, the Census Bureau has determined that Vietnamese has reached the threshold where we have to provide all of our election materials in Vietnamese also. Now, this is a little, we've seen articles about this, we've seen the Census Bureau talk about it, but officially the Department of Justice provides that notice. And we haven't got that notice yet, but we expect it to come anytime.
Tarrant County had to already did the constitutional amendment election adding Vietnamese and
I think my memory of them, they've been since 2016, Tarrant County, yeah. And so that is a huge, huge deal for us to convert all of our ballots, all of our materials, everything, all of our signage, everything we do, we now have to provide in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. And so I've made a request for a new internal position to get a person who speaks the Vietnamese language. In the meantime, that to hire people takes a long time. In the meantime, we're going to try to look at vendors to help us with converting, providing some of these translations, and then we'll also be looking for volunteers too. So it's very early. We just found about this last week, and so we're kind of plugging away, but we know that we got a lot of work headed for us.
just be thankful you're not.
Yes. I know Los Angeles County, when I back in California, I think they are 7 or 8.
Any questions regarding a new language?
Does that go for bilingual clerks as well? This is Renato de los Santos asking about
That is correct. We're in addition to providing all those materials, our goal will be to provide Vietnamese speaking clerks in all those locations. But whether it's in Spanish or Vietnamese, if we don't happen to have that, we also plan on having some sort of technology that'll allow a Vietnamese speaker to speak to a centrally located person if we can't have someone out in the field.
What is that trigger, Michael, by precinct? It's been 5% for precinct for Spanish.
It's 5%.
Will it be the same trigger for Vietnamese as well?
That's correct. And keep in mind that because we're a vote center county, it's hard for us to say, well, this particular, et cetera, because anyone can vote anyway. So what we try to do is to provide Spanish speakers, for instance, in every location. So we'll try, that'll be our goal.
Any additional questions? All right, let's move on to lawsuit.
I think I talked. I am involved in 3 different lawsuits. Vote versus several counties regarding related to HB 3107 regarding the use of the requirement to have wet signatures on. The claim is that it violates Civil Rights Act, the First and 14th Amendment. It seeks to enjoin defendants from implementing. The second one is LULAC versus Travis, Bear, Harris, Hidalgo, Dallas. That's related to the implementation of SB 1111, of the First, 14th, and 26th Amendment, and seeks to enjoin defendants from implementing SB 1111. The third one is LULAC versus Bear, Travis, Hidalgo, Dallas, Harris, El Paso, and I think the Attorney General and the Secretary of State related to the implementation of SB 1, claims violations of the Voting Rights Act, First and 14th Amendment, seeks to enjoin defendants from implementing certain provisions of SB 1. And I think that one in particular, I think it's been, other parties have joined, can tell you that this is, it's very difficult to handle these lawsuits. They're unbelievably time consuming. I think I was on a phone call for 3.5 hours today, providing answers to roughly 640 questions related to these lawsuits. And so the DA's office has been fantastic in assisting us to provide those answers and as part of the discovery process in preparation of these lawsuits. And other than that, I probably can't say too much.
That in mind, are there any questions regarding the lawsuit? If not, then we'll move on to SB 1 changes.
Okay, so Senate Bill 1 was passed in the second legislative session of the legislature this year. Became effective December 2nd. It was not December 7th. Election had been ordered prior to December 2nd. So the first election that will be impacted will be the March 1st primary. It does a lot of things. I think it's a 70-plus page bill. And I think we have a summary that we've handed. Summary by the Secretary of State that kind of summarizes legislative changes. This is from Election Advisory 2021-21. But these are really helpful. I got to tell you, our Secretary of State's office does a great job in writing the summary to help election officials navigate these. So this summary will help you guys navigate an idea of all the things that change. And so this is a 20-plus page or 20-page document that kind of summarizes those changes. But some of this, I'm sure you've read about some of this, the highlights, a ban on in-person drive-through voting. So this is something that was never practiced in Dallas County. New regulations for early voting hours, including a ban on 24-hour voting, ban on the distribution of mail-in ballot applications by the elections administrator unless requested. New identification requirements for voting by mail, new mail ballot application, which by the way is now available. If you had applied for a mail ballot prior to this new application form that's provided by the Secretary of State, that application would be void. Have to fill out this new application. A new mail ballot envelope that has a secrecy leave on it that you don't tear off to protect the voters' information. New poll watcher requirements, poll watcher mandatory training, and online updates for voters moving to new counties via Texas. And so that's just some highlights. I can tell you that SB 1 is daunting, and it's there's a couple good things, a lot of things that I just personally think that are going to make the voting much harder for people. I can tell you this, that I've been an election official in 4 states. And in those 4 states, laws in Texas are by far the most inefficient and full of red tape, more than any other country. It makes California look efficient, believe it or not. SB 1 and some of this other legislation simply piles on more and more red tape, which frankly is a little surprising to me because coming from California, you always hear, oh, Texas is great. No taxes, efficient, runs so much better than California. And maybe that's true in many other places. I can tell you it's absolutely not true when it comes to election administration. And in my personal opinion, I think Texans deserve better. And so I think that there needs to be, in my opinion, if ever asked, I think that there needs to be major election overhaul. And I don't think this is the right direction, in my opinion. As an elections administrator, I don't have an opinion. As an elections administrator, I simply apply the laws as they're handed down.
Any questions about SB 1, Michael?
This is Elaine Campbell. Are there, I know you said that the changes are daunting and this is a highlight. Are there changes that VDRs need to be aware of between now? I know that in January you have to renew. No, that's just even year, so you don't. So that's my question. Are there changes that VDRs need to be aware of? Because there are a lot of voter registration activities taking place right now, as I'm sure you're aware, because the primaries are in March. So I don't know if there's information on the elections page or something that, or I don't know. What are your thoughts around that, Michael?
I don't recall any, Esmeralda, you recall?
Volunteer deputy registered rules. I don't recall. Changing with the state, something.
I can't hear Esmeralda.
Organizations that about to be helpful one day they change. They can't have pre-filled forms. They used to have pre-filled forms. Voter can just sign the names. Can't have it.
I'm sorry, I can't hear the answer.
Yeah, whoever's talking needs to
repeat that,
the
please.
microphone.
Previously, some VDRs used to like to pre-fill their applications. That's not going to be allowed anymore.
Did you get that, Elaine?
They have to be true blank forms.
Okay, any additional questions?
Okay.
Yes, this is Lavetta Levels. With the increase or adding the poll watcher abilities at the voting sites, who takes on the responsibility and the budget of providing additional security?
Well, I think the issue with poll watchers is, first off, let me say this. Anybody who's been a poll watcher here, I'm looking over this direction, they'll tell you that my approach to poll watchers is complete transparency. I do not put up walls. I do not put tape on the floor. I do not try to hide things. I know that some poll watchers have felt that that's been kind of a policy here in the past. I can't tell you if it has or not. I can tell you that whatever the policy was, it doesn't matter, because the policy now is that we're as transparent as possible. And that same thing applies not only here, but in the field. My concerns with SB 1 is that SB 1 blurs the lines a little bit, and I think potentially makes poll workers and poll watchers more adversarial, and we're concerned that could cause problems at the polling places. Not only that, my other concern is that poll workers are now legally at risk if they do certain things to hinder a poll watcher, and so I think that potentially could hurt us when it comes to recruiting poll workers, et cetera. So I certainly understand the intent, and I agree with that intent. I always practice that, to be as transparent as possible, because we never want to raise suspicions by trying to hide something. But I am concerned about the implementation of this particular bill, that segment of the bill.
I might issue a counterpoint. The law, the intent is to make it less confrontational, where we've had, election judges being too confrontational towards poll watchers and not giving them the freedom to do their jobs. Well, including getting law enforcement involved, which is grossly inappropriate. So.
Who's that speaking, Michael?
My counter to that would be, just think about a classroom, and you have the teacher is in charge of the classroom, and so someone's got to be the boss. And so if you don't have someone being the boss, if you have students that have the intent of being bad actors, and that teacher doesn't have the authority to keep order in the classroom, there's the potential for a lot of problems.
Exactly.
You could see that same thing happening at a polling place if you have poll watchers with bad intent.
Exactly. So I go back to my question, Michael. Is there or will there be a conversation with city law enforcement, with the city of Dallas, with county sheriff department? March 1st is tomorrow, and we know that if we don't have a plan, then we are putting people at risk, possibly. From our judges to our workers, and having people out there at risk in the middle of an audit is an opportunity for a full catastrophe. And so I would strongly recommend that there be a safety plan in place prior to March 1 to protect workers, to protect the judges, as well as those persons that are voting site workers.
If I could, I'm involved in law enforcement. The city police departments have no authority to enforce the Texas Election Code. So we just cause a big problem when we get, local law enforcement involved in elections. Who needs to step up is the Dallas Sheriff Department. They do have authority to enforce the Texas Election Code. However, the election department has not been particularly interested in getting involved in elections. So
I don't believe that this is a question of implementing the law. I think it's a question of disorderly conduct, the possibility of behaviors, not so much as implementing the code or the law. That's not the question. The question is what happens when it becomes disorderly. And at that point, it is, we cover 10, 12 different cities, and those persons need to, I would think that they would not want to have any disturbances in their cities at their voting locations. So I think that there's buy-in and accountability across the board.
My thoughts are in response to everyone, and what I've been telling other people as we're preparing for this March 1st election, is that I've never seen in my 4 jurisdictions poll workers, poll watchers, poll workers with each other, poll workers with poll watchers, et cetera, not get along as much as here. I've never, in my 4 different counties, I've never had to call a sheriff twice. Yet I hear here that that's a very common occurrence. That we have people fighting, we have people in physical altercations, that we have people arguing, and I think that that's a function of training. And so one of the things that we're trying to do, and we're trying to implement for this next election, is introducing a higher degree of professionalism at the polling places. I can tell you that in our central count, we've got our presiding judge and our alternate presiding judge. They're not fighting. They're getting along as professionals. I can tell you that in our early voting ballot board, we've got presiding judge and an alternate presiding judge that work together hand in hand, and because they're here to do a job, and they do a fantastic job of it. And that's the type of approach and the type of expectation that we want to set in the polling places. To this level of professionalism, to say, hey, we're both here to do our jobs. We're both here to watch our party's interests also, but more importantly, we're here to do a job, and we're here to get along. And so we're going to try to do more of that, to try to set those expectations, and to try to report out those who don't meet those expectations, report that to the parties. So they have that information in their pocket the next time they appoint. And so hopefully we're going to try, hopefully we'll be successful at lowering the temperature a little bit. Because if we just try that much harder to get along, it's not that hard. So we'll see. And so that's the type of thing, for instance, though, as an advisory board, it would be very helpful to get your feedback on what's the causation for this tension, and what can we do to prevent it.
Very good. Additional questions regarding SB1?
I have a lot of experience with that area, and I would be glad to discuss it with you private if you'd like. I've been bringing up, talking about a red herring that really does not happen. And Dallas County, the nature of Dallas County is there are many Republican poll watchers and very few, if any, Democratic poll watchers. So,
any additional? One.
To work on SB1, it says Larry pointed out to me. This is Bob. Said that for the primaries, there's co-chairmen, co-judges.
We'll talk about that in a
Oh.
minute.
Anything else regarding SB1?
Yes, this is Camila. I have a question about under the changes list, the very last one that says online updates for voters moving to new counties via texas.gov. Can you just tell me what the change is? Like, what's the change?
Is Revy, you want to talk about that one real quick? Maybe step up. What is current versus what the changes are?
For which one?
Online updates on DPS.
Texas Online. Before, you can only update your name and address if you were, or your address if you're moving within the county. Now, if you're moving somewhere else in another county in Texas, you can now update your information to Texas Online.
Thank you.
So that's one of the good things in SB. I can tell you this though, I need to crawl because in most other states, it's not just for moves; it's online voter registration. And think about that. it's 2021, almost 2022, and we're still filling out pieces of paper. So nobody else does. I mean, I'll get back to that. This line I'm going to repeat. Texans deserve better. I mean, this is, to me, it's inexcusable to not have online registration in this day and age.
A VDR, so this is great for a lot of VDRs to get that information out there, legal voters, marshal the polls, those groups, that people know, hey, you can just update it online now. They can actually, Home County, Dallas County, Terrence, Dallas to Kaufman, or that's a big help.
Any additional questions regarding SB1? If not, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, election review.
So I wanted to just talk about a little bit about the November 2nd election, the one that we just had. It's the last time we met, it was election. And then talk about what's coming up. So I already mentioned there's a March 1st primary, which is going to be countywide. There'll be a May 7th joint election, which will most likely be near countywide. We don't know yet. Then there's going to be a May 24th primary runoff election, which will be countywide. And that's the one that will include precinct chairs. And so that May 7th and that May 24th election are going to be really difficult. I mean, that's an unbelievably fast turnaround. It's just, I mean, frankly, if you want to talk about election law reform, I could point right to that. 2 dates like that, that's insanity. So that's going to be very difficult for us as an organization to pull off. And then there's a mid-June 2022 joint runoff election. And I don't have the exact date on that. I don't remember if it's June 11th. It's set, but I don't have it with me. So having said that, I just want to talk about a little bit, real quickly, on the November election, what we did a little bit differently, and then the March election, what we may do. And so I think in the last meeting, I went through a long litany of what we did for the May and June elections last year, major reforms and how we were doing things. And there was like 17 plus major items that we changed. Going into November, we changed some more. I'm just going to go, there's a handout. This was a memo to Commissioners Court. And so I'll just, that I put out before the election that you can kind of follow along and kind of see the level of detail. But I'll just run through the highlights of that. So mask usage at the vote centers. The governor had an executive order. Judge Jenkins had an order saying to wear masks. There, of course, there was litigation for that, and so as an office, we did not require voters to wear masks. We did direct poll workers to wear masks, but we weren't, we weren't sure exactly if that was going to be problematic and how we would handle it if we had problems. The good news is I don't think we had maybe one or two calls the whole day about mask usage. So that was great news in that we found that poll workers were being professional, and there was probably a degree of tolerance either way. So that was good news. We had a brand new judge's notebook. If anyone has been a poll worker before, or if you haven't, in the past we kind of threw a lot of information at you, and what we did with this judge's notebook, we put it in a format that was more user friendly, we believe, so that a judge could walk through the day in a chronological order, page by page, kind of giving him or her instructions on how to conduct that election. So that went over very well. We're going to continue to tweak that and make it better and better for every election. We typically, when you handle a voter, 80% of the time it's easy. There's no problems, but then 20% of the time there's exceptions to the standard voting procedure. And so those are very hard to teach, very hard to remember. So we've kind of presented that much differently. I think it's exceptions. Off the top of my head, I can remember exceptions 1 through 5 were exceptions that were handled by the clerk. Exceptions 6 through 11 were handled by the judge, but did not result in a provisional ballot. And I think exceptions 11 through 15 were exceptions that resulted in a provisional ballot. So it's taking that same information that we've always had and packaging it in a way that's more it's a person can handle, a judge can handle in a more timely fashion, and without being so confused. And so we did put that together, and then we also worked on when it comes to those exceptions to the standard voting procedure. There's probably out of 450 judges, there's probably a handful that know how to do it off the top of their heads. Some of them think they know how to do it, but I can tell you that in the 2020 presidential election, we had a 50% error rate with our provisional ballots. And so what that tells you is our judges, it's hard. It's very hard. And so what we're trying to do is provide more and more guidance to those judges to get through those exceptions to the standard voting procedure. So we'll continue to hone that. We're hoping to take that same information that we put on paper this last election and to put it into a cell phone, so that as a reference, so that to walk a person through that process, a judge through that process. So we're seeing that's one of our goals. I don't know if we'll get it done or not, but we're hoping to. Vote centers utilized, we had 443, which is a high number compared to the 469 that were approved 2 years ago, but I don't think we've ever been at 469. So we're at 443, 49 early voting centers. Turnout was really low. We had projected 9%, and it ended up being 6.62%. Most of that was really low. Election day was pretty close to where we thought, but early voting was about half of what we thought. So extremely low turnout. Poll worker coordination. We worked with the parties. There was a new set of poll workers for this election. We worked with the parties to get that, to get recruited and replace those poll workers. We in the future, because I remember I'm kind of talking about this election and future elections, we intend to continue to partner with the parties. Our goal is to have them using the same software that we use, so that we aren't not passing Excel files back and forth. And once the minute you send that file, it's automatically obsolete. So what we want to do is work more hand in hand with the parties in that poll worker placement and recruitment. We continued the use of our SWAT team, our set up assistance team. This was a new concept that we came up with to, a lot of people say, I'll work on election day, but I can't work 15 hours. I'll work a couple hours. And so we're putting those people to work to help. I think we had around 50 polling places where we had new judges or someone who might have a problem getting set up in the morning in a timely fashion. So we sent that SWAT team out to those locations, as well as our inspectors and our technicians to those locations to make sure they could be opened in a timely fashion. And we're in pretty good shape for this last election. And so that's something we're going to make a permanent piece of what we do, is to always have a SWAT team. Training. When it came to training, I mentioned the judge's notebook. Not only did we have a new judge's notebook, but we've kind of reinvented, to the extent that we could under the law, reinvented what we did at a polling place. And then, of course, the procedures that we use, et cetera, how we handle things there. And then, of course, we had corresponding training that went with this. So we kind of threw out most of our old training and reorganized it in such a way that we think was much more logical, easier to understand, simpler, broken into two pieces: basic training and advanced training. So basic training is really kind of, think of that's what your clerks do, versus advanced training is what your judges do. Keep in mind that we didn't close out advanced training. We let clerks come to advanced training too, because some clerks do advanced work to help their judges. The training was very popular. I think on here, on a scale of 1 to 5, we always grade ourselves. We always ask for feedback. And so we had feedback forms. And on a scale of 1 to 5, 64% graded us with a 5, and 30% graded us with a 4, 4% with a 3, 2% with a 2, and 1% with a 1. That we do have a training committee, our subcommittee that's going to report out on this, and so we've given them the statistics, I think just today, in fact, about all the feedback, because not only was it grading, but it was also comments. And so those comments were helping to revise the training. We will constantly be tweaking that training. I don't think you'll ever see 2 trainings that are exactly the same. I think the big question going forward with the parties right now is in-person versus online training. And new judges and clerks are always going to have to be in person. There's this question for a repeat judge, should they have the ability to come online, only get training online. So that'll be one of the recommendations that I'm looking for from the subcommittee. I think there's arguments to be made both ways. When we talk about training for, like we talked about this professionalism training and some other the use of cell phones, etc., it seems to me that in-person training would be really helpful. On the other hand, we don't pay for training, and it's a burden for people to have to come here. That's something that we may address in the future about the pay, but it's not something that's currently been fixed yet. I think that's all I had for training. I'm going to pause right there and see if you have any questions, because then I'll keep moving on. Any questions? Okay. Mail ballots. This is sorted, by the way, by our department, So mail ballot team, no major processes. Remember, the mail ballot team's the team we completely rebuilt from the ground up last May, where we went from a completely paper-based process to an electronic process. So we're going to save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the future. The bad news on that is that we have a $400,000 Agilis ballot sorter that scans signatures, and that's one of the ways we can be electronic. SB1 effectively made that $400,000 investment obsolete because it requires the scanning of 2 sides of a carrier envelope instead of 1 side. I don't know why we need the back side of that envelope. I mean, it was a kind of a silly law, but it is what it is. Delivery coordination for our logistics team. The biggest change there is that historically we've had a problem with tables and chairs. We have poor insight on what tables and chairs are available at our locations. We have very poor insight into anything about our locations, frankly, because we did a survey in 2019 that was an ADA survey, and after that we took those results and we put them in a binder and we put it on the shelf and never looked at it again. And so, well, we're going to try to resolve that by doing some better surveys, full surveys, electronic surveys with iPads, taking pictures, knowing exactly what's there, what sort of tables are available for us, our usage, how many parking spaces. If you have 100 parking spaces, but 95% are full, it's not, you don't have 100 spaces, you have 5. So that type of intelligence that we don't have now that we want to have. And one of those is tables and chairs. We had rented tables and chairs historically for places. We would bring in our tables and chairs and they push their tables and chairs out of the way, or vice versa. And so that's the type of inefficiency we're going to try to get rid of. In addition, we're not going to rent tables and chairs, because the renting was problematic in 2020. We had a bill for $22,000 in lost tables and chairs. And so what we've done is we've went out and we purchased our own tables and chairs. We're delivering those smaller tables inside our ESCs. And so we won't have that double delivery problem with delivering tables and chairs and delivering ESCs and get confusion and everything. So we're trying to tighten things up as far as that delivery goes. That's going to be very helpful. What's going to make that easier is that we got our new facility that's being built across the street. That new facility, I can't tell you, the county, Daryl Martin and Gordon Heichel have done a fantastic job in pushing this and getting us the tools that we need to conduct the elections. And so the warehouse is going to be ready for this election, we believe. For the rest of the facility is still kind of in transit, and so we're under construction. But we're, by this summer and certainly by next November, we're going to have both facilities up and running in a single campus instead of us being in 3 different facilities around the county.
Mike, this may or may not be time to. There was an email concerned by election judge about fire stations. We can take that generically. Any fire station probably could be applicable in the old manual world of running election. In the new electronic world, I question whether older, smaller fire stations are appropriate if they do not have a community. Still run a good election without a community room, really problematic. May or may not have an inventory of the nature of sites we use, identifying fire stations, schools, and churches, and so on. But we probably need to take a look at fire stations as a category going forward.
Yeah, I don't disagree. We need to take a look at all of our locations and make sure that we've got the best locations possible. I don't know what happened to my screen. Check it out, Chance. I don't know. I'll continue on this document while he tries to fix the online presentation. Central count area. In this last election, we kind of started because of SB1. Knowing what was coming with SB1, there's certain new requirements on how, making it more convenient for poll workers, and adding cameras. So central count, we started to make some changes this last election. Now in December and January, we're going to be making significant changes, revising the way that room's laid out, adding new cameras that will be live streamed. So anybody from home can watch what's happening in that location. And so that's all mandated by SB1. In addition to that, though, we're going to make things even better for our poll watchers, where right now poll watchers will be over our shoulders like this, looking at our screens. We're going to buy big screens to put them up on the wall, let poll watchers know exactly what's going on with the entering of those ballots. So in providing places for them to sit and be very accommodating to those poll watchers in the future. So that's kind of coming. Phase 1 was already done. Phase 2 is coming now. Our election hardware team, big thing there is we're moving more and more away from our election vendor. I think ES&S is a great vendor, but we depended on them too much. This last election, we renegotiated one of our contracts. We're going to save about $250,000 a year in maintenance agreements, and then we're continuing to move away from them. For instance, in central count, rather than in central count, all of the election ES&S people doing all the work. We're actually doing the work, and they're there simply as a consultant. And so we're going to save hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Software technology. We're having a heck of a time trying to find people to want to work. We're getting ghosted a lot. All the same things you hear, I'm sure, everywhere. Getting people to actually join. I think we had 3 different technology people agreed for the job and then back out. But nonetheless, we do have our new IT assistant chief, who's done a fantastic job with what he's got of building. For instance, we got a new system that monitors our e-poll books, synthesizes the information from e-poll books, synthesizes the information from our wireless routers, and puts those into a big spreadsheet. We have a whole team of people. I think 8 people that are constantly monitoring those in the morning. If they're not seeing people come online, they're calling them, asking them where you at, why aren't you set up, that sort of thing. Because that goes hand in glove with what we did with our judge notebooks. Because our judge notebooks now are filled with checklists You know, how do you open a polling place in the morning? How do you do this? How do you do it? Everything's a checklist. Because if you ever watch anything about NASA, they need a procedure. And, you know, and because it's that important. And so we consider elections the same way. We need a procedure. We need task lists. Because even the best poll workers can get things wrong if they don't have that reminder. So, so with the software technology, they're doing the same things here to help those poll workers get things open in a timely manner. Facilities, I talked about the new warehouse next door. It's also going to be a training facility and an actual polling place. We don't have a polling place here now, but we will. Outdoor signage. There was new signage this year. I don't know if you want to go ahead and show the signage. We had outdoor signage, and so this is new outdoor signage. We had our signage was very old, pretty beat up. Plus, it used polling place language instead of vote center language. So these were new signs, and because of strains in time and money and supply chain issues, this was the size that we got. We want to make them bigger, so we're placing an order for these bigger signs that will be that size. Indoors, if you ever saw a polling place, it was blue tape heaven where there was, 40 signs taped up with a bunch of glue. We bind all of our signs into visual signs like that, where so it's a single sign placed up, English and Spanish. Now there'll be a third and be the B's. Signage. This is an outdoor at the entryway sign requirements for that. So that was part of trying to make our judges' job a little bit easier. So that's been going really well and was really well received. This is something you guys should be aware of. There was a court ruling on electioneering, and this will hold true for the future too. That a person historically, a person cannot wear any sort of political materials at a polling place. And this new court ruling said that you could someone can come in wearing a Biden shirt or a Trump shirt, as long as they're not on the ballot. So if they're on the ballot, if whatever it is on the ballot, then they can't wear it. But if they're not on the ballot, they can wear it. So this has
always been the rule that something get carried away.
That's about it. Well, let me talk a little bit more about the upcoming election. So the March 2nd primary election has always historically been, well, I'll back up. You can run primary elections 3 ways in Texas. Parties can run it themselves, and they can get equipment from us, or each party can separately contract with me to help them do certain things. So I have responsibilities, they have responsibilities, and that's the way it's always been done here. The third way is to contract with me, both parties contract with me and the Commissioner's Court to have it a 3-way contract where it's running a joint election. There are huge advantages to a joint election, most importantly for voters, because it's very confusing for a voter to go into this location. Oh, this is a Democratic place, not a Republican. You got to go down the street for the Republican place. Or I'm in this place. Oh, the Democrats are over here in this room, and the Republicans are in that room. So it's very confusing, and plus the locations vary from where they were the last election. So what we want to do is have a stability and have run a joint election where that joint election looks no different than the election you saw last November 2nd. And last November 2nd, you walked in, I'm here, check in, they issue a ballot. And then you vote that ballot, you drop it in the vote tabulator. The goal is to do that very same thing. The only difference being 2 differences. When a person goes to choose their ballot, we simply turn the poll book around and a person chooses Democrat or Republican. Then it issues that Democrat or Republican ballot. And then The other difference is when you have a voter, the exception to the standard voting procedure, a provisional ballot, for instance, that would go, if you're a Republican, you go to the Republican judge, the co-judge, or you go to the Democratic co-judge. That's the other big difference. Instead of having a presiding judge and an alternate presiding judge, you have co-judges. And so this is the way it's done most places, and this is the way that's the most efficient, the way it's most simple for the voter. And so we proposed that to the parties, and the parties are contemplating that. We kind of hammered out a bunch of details, and we've got a proposed contract to them right now. And by this Friday, we hope to have some sort of resolution to it, because we hope to have something before Commissioners Court next Tuesday, if that works out. If not, then we'll revert back to running separate primaries in a much less efficient manner.
It's my understanding the Democratic Party has agreed to joint primaries. Have that feedback, or whether you have feedback Republican Party.
Yeah.
Michael, on the cautions, the challenge of securing privacy for the poll book. If we have to announce during the process, you have to make that selection on the poll book. There's people within earshot of your estimate. Privacy necessarily problematic. I'm concerned about that. Sure that, and maybe, that we can't allow people to be close, as close to the poll book as might have not been a problem before. Can be a problem. People within the earshot or eyeshot of voter having to make that selection at that point.
Yeah, in theory, there won't be anything to hear, because there won't be any transaction. Are you a Democrat or Republican? It'll simply be go ahead and choose your ballot. So they'll just pick it themselves. But from my shot,
we get calls for election clerk discipline.
Yeah.
To not call out parties.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi. This is Millie, and I have a question. How will the voting centers be chosen for the primary?
So the vote centers would be the same vote centers that we used in the November election, or as close as possible. The idea, that was one of the requests from one of the parties, is to have as many locations as possible. We agreed to that. There was a request from the Republican Party to use pre-printed serialized ballots. We agreed to that. And so we're trying to find that compromise. Give each party what they want. So I think we're close, but I think there's change is hard, and we see that internally here. Employees are reluctant to change, but once you show them the light and we talk about it and talk it through, and people say, oh yeah, that makes sense. The same way with the parties. The more we talk, the more we kind of lay out the logic. We talk about the benefits versus what are the problems. I think the problems the other way, the previous way, are obvious. The election 2 years ago was highly problematic, many ways. Finding poll workers, getting people to the right locations, getting enough poll workers, et cetera, et cetera. I think we had a problem getting USB sticks back. We had to go to court, reopen, have a court, give a court order to count 144 or 44 locations, something like that, because of confusion, because there were separate party, vote tabulators. And so we're trying to, like everything else we're doing, our goal is to simplify, and make things in less moving parts, because the less moving parts and the simpler they are, the less mistakes there are. So that's our goal, and we'll see what happens.
We have a center reduction November 20.
I don't know. That's going to be up to the Commissioner Court. I don't know their opinions on that.
just every so many years.
I think that, I know that in 2019, the intent was to come back after an election cycle and to take a new look. We went to Commissioner's Court last August, ready to do that study. And the time, redistricting, the thing we talked about earlier, was all pushed back. And the instruction from Commissioner's Court that time was very logical when they said, that not now, because redistricting hasn't been done yet. And so now that redistricting is done, now we're in the middle of an election season. So we just don't know if there's going to be an appetite for that. It remains to be seen.
Any additional questions for Michael regarding the primary election? Now we're going to go ahead and go on to the.
Second, I might sort of in here that relates to some other topic. Talking about phone banks, we have an election judge pipeline, and I have a concept, if election judge has a concept, that's a problem, in conflict with a poll watcher, call the judge pipeline and let it be adjudicated through that, rather than the election judge have taken it on themselves to attempt to contact law enforcement, something that's, very rarely ever really in law enforcement.
I couldn't agree more. And I can tell you this, in the November election, one thing I didn't mention was that we more than doubled the judge hotline. Our judge hotline was usually around 14. I think we had over 30 lines this time. And we wanted judges to actually be able to get through 8 first. We want calls because we want to provide them guidance. And certainly guidance that we want to provide for this election, especially, is we have conflict with the change with board. So we want to be there for them. One thing I should mention, the parties had mentioned, we have inspectors. I think we normally have 35 inspectors go to our 443 locations, each of them with a route from 12 to 14 locations. And the ask of us was, can you please, because of these issues, potential issues, can you increase that? So we're looking at 45 inspectors with only 10 locations each, so they can get there, spend a little bit more time with each of those locations. So that's all part of the compromise to try to come up with a better election. If, and all these things are if, we do a joint primary.
I'll talk about a little bit on the inspectors right now, since we're right there.
Sure.
Is there, those folks really ought to have.
They all have.
When you're having a checkout flight, it's an experienced pilot. It's not somebody who's never flown a plane. So
the goal, I can tell you where we want to be. Clerks become judges, or judges become inspectors. Inspectors become part-time workers. They become full-time workers, and they get promoted up, and they become elected officials. There's a career ladder. And so inspectors absolutely should be experienced judges. They're the cream of the crop. We're not quite there yet. I think most of our inspectors had been judges, but we're still, in that honing process and getting that, finding that cream of the crop to be there.
And there was a point is these inspectors need to understand the responsibility and authority of the election judges. I was told about a situation where the inspector came into the polling place after already having moved an electioneering sign and had a complaint about the access door to the to the polling place. And I think we really need to be advising inspectors, you need to check in first with the election judge, respect the authority of the election judge before you do anything else on the checklist. The respecting the election judges trumps any convenience of checking things on the way in. So.
And just so you know, those inspectors have a checklist. I think the very first thing is to introduce yourself to the judge. So they are instructed to do that. We provide this checklist. We don't know what people. So that's all part of the grading. We're looking at those sheets. This is one thing I should mention. Have parties with evidence, but they can make good decisions. So that evidence consists of did the judge fill out his checklist? Did the judge have complaints? Did the judge, when the inspector came and inspected, did the inspector have to fix things? Were there provisionals filled out? Putting all that together to say, some great judges. Here's a few that are, there's a little problematic. Game parties might want to talk to these folks. Straighten out so well. So, but in the past, we haven't had that sort of evidence. It was more anecdotal. What we want is objective evidence to give to them.
I would still hold out for a softer, gentler title for those folks. A reviewer or examiner, inspector sounds kind of onerous, and there are other inspectors, you know, in the election process.
Yeah, I think you made that comment before, and I think our distinction was you got a state inspector and a county inspector. So these are county inspectors, and there was a certain logic to that we liked.
And by the way, the state inspectors, they aren't necessarily trained or experienced. So been there, done that. So.
Okay, any last questions before we move on to the subcommittee reports? If not, then we'll go ahead and move into the subcommittee reports, which is next on the agenda. We can start with the training reports. Millie, are you online?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
You can. Would you mind giving us the report regarding the training?
Yes. So the training committee met last Thursday, and we met pretty straightforward. We're trying to assess the training that goes on for election workers and to figure out what, if anything, needs improvement, what's going well. You should have received, as part of your handouts by email or in person, a copy of our minutes. Thank you, Bonnie, for providing us with those minutes and taking them. I won't go over everything that's listed there, but and Michael actually mentioned a lot of the things while he was discussing the November election. A couple of the things that came up from election workers and election judges about the training was that they appreciated that it was more hands-on than usual. They appreciated the use of videos, and we discussed recommending that more videos be used as part of training. We talked about how for new workers, they had some difficulty because it is a lot of information, and we're hoping that maybe with videos that might be a little more helpful to them. There's some issues. Some people had issues with the handbook, where a couple of experienced judges said that what was in the handbook didn't actually match what the actual in-person process was. Michael talked about this earlier, but there were some comments about better coordination with facilities, things like, are there enough outlets for everything that was needed and the like. One of the recommendations that the subcommittee talked about was that election workers should be paid for the training. A couple of comments that we heard from election workers were there appeared to be some software issues with people trying to sign up for training spots. I think the first couple of days, a lot of people had problems. And then a couple of people I know told me that they got multiple emails from the elections department once they signed up. So they were getting like 5 or 6 of the same emails. So that sounds like maybe that's some kind of software issue. People liked that they could actually reach somebody when they had a question. There were some problems maybe of implementation where not everybody got a callback or some tickets were lost. There's also a question about the availability of training materials. Some people mentioned that it was a lot of paper, and they questioned why some of this could not be put online so that the workers could have access online rather than needing to have everything on paper. And then there were also at least 2 or 3 comments that people heard about why, wanting to know why it is that they could not take any training materials home. Let's see. So those were the main comments about the training. We did receive the survey results. Thank you, Esmeralda. Unfortunately, we didn't know about them before Thursday meeting, so we did not all get to, as a group, go over those comments. But I think unless one of the other members of the committee thinks I left something pertinent out that's not in the minutes, I think that's our report.
Can I just, thank you so much for that. I can tell you that the training subcommittee is really important to me. Because, and here's why. We knew that we needed to revise our training. The question for us was, should we, and we had a very short window of time, should we push it through for the November election? Or should we just take our time, get it perfect for the March election? I had a lot of wise people tell me probably not a good idea to implement brand new stuff in a primary. So so then we pushed as much as we could up to the very last minute for our training for November, and thus it was pretty darn good, but it needs to be better, and especially when it comes to the materials, being timely, getting things, having access to some of those materials, et cetera, et cetera. So own that in time for the March election.
I will say this, that from talking to both new election judges and experienced election judges, they were very excited to hear that this committee will be having a training subcommittee to advise. So people are very pleased about that and happy to give their feedback.
I just want to quickly stress of course, the importance of what we do here, I think, on the CF committee. Most of the work and advice, I think, will probably come from our subcommittees. It's important that we each take that into consideration. I know this was maybe not as well attended, the subcommittees that we had listed, and we kind of wanted them to meet before this particular meeting. I'm just hoping that everybody can join the subcommittee as they kind of pop up, and I know we're going to be talking about that after this next committee report. But I would encourage you guys to do that, join up. Again, that's where most of the work is coming from. Our charge is to assist the elections administrator with what they need done, so we'll need that feedback, that back and forth that kind of comes through the citizenry of Dallas County in terms of what it is they think is best, things of that nature. So I would encourage you guys, of course, to join up with these subcommittees. I think the only limitation that we might have is that we don't have a quorum in those subcommittee meetings. So hopefully we can shoot for 6 in our future subcommittee meetings. Okay, with that said, did any other member of the training subcommittee want to add anything to Millie's report?
Hi, it's Lavetta Levels. I just want to thank Millie for, I think she covered all the points, and the minutes from the meeting were very specific, so I appreciate that. And again, thanks to Michael for leading us in implementing these subcommittees. I do want to echo the concern from the election judges around the training and the facilities as well. I see that you did pick that up from our meeting as well, that there is a concern about the inconsistency in the facilities throughout the county, and whatever assistance Dallas County Elections can do to facilitate more consistency in the electrical setup, in tables, chairs, and all those items that are so important on the day of the election. We would greatly appreciate that. So thank you again for listening to that concern and going beyond the training subcommittee's needs and requests.
Thank you, Dr. Levels. Bonnie wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just wanted to stress that we talked about how important the student clerks were, and we all like them. They're not afraid of the electrical equipment like some of the older judges are. They're not intimidated by it. And that might even be good to use student clerks to help set up and take down the equipment. But they were very much appreciated.
One question. When
I
is
guess
the subcommittee?
Oh.
If he find that when training and just flip a switch. So Sooner we get the feedback, the better. So I'm hoping you guys meet again soon.
Yeah, I may not have mentioned, I think I mentioned in the emails that I had appointed, according to the bylaws, I appointed Millie Dominich as the chair of the training committee, and Camila Bordeaux as the head of the mission committee. So it's incumbent upon you two guys to of course, get together and make a determination on when you're going to have your next meeting, and let the rest of the subcommittee members know about it, and set that all up. But as Michael mentioned, training is particularly important. He wants some feedback, so take that into consideration.
Can't have dueling subcommittees. We did it on.
Yes,
on the same sides.
that's another thing. We need to have them on different dates. I think that was a lack of coordination, I think, between myself and Esmeralda in setting that up. So I apologize for that, and we'll make sure that doesn't happen again, so we can each be on different subcommittees. Okay, with that said,
I'm sorry. I have a question. This is Elaine Campbell. I have a question regarding the. Thank you so much, Millie. You definitely captured all of the points, the good, the positive, and the challenges and the suggestions. My question is, Michael. So now that the initial round of the feedback that's been gathered, and Millie discussing it, and we're all discussing with the training, will we get a response to the things that were requested as a challenge? How will we be able to answer those things?
I think that's very reasonable. I think once we kind of get your final report on your recommendations, and hopefully that's sooner rather than later, we will go through, each item and, tell you what's doable and what's not doable, and what's, some things may be doable for this election, and some things might have to push. So we'll just have to. The time is short. Just keep in mind the trainings. It's going to start at the end of January.
Right.
So we got very little time to make adjustments.
Okay.
But certainly we will get back to you guys. Probably in one of our meetings, I suppose, unless we want other forum.
okay, anything else? Any other comments or questions? If not, we'll move on to the mission report. Camila, you online?
Yes. So for our subcommittee, it's our mission subcommittee, and what we did was spend most of our time coming up with what our goal is as a committee, like what we want to get out of our meetings of the subcommittee. And so the primary objective that we came up with is that we are proposing recommendations to the elections department on the current mission, which at the last meeting we heard, seemed unworkable, using Michael Scarpello's words. And then providing ideas for a vision statement, which does not currently exist, and brainstorming goals. That would be the primary objective that we discussed. And then the secondary objective would be to make recommendations on the purpose and the role of SEAC tied to the mission. So kind of looking back at the primary objective, but, how do we kind of distinguish what the purpose and role of SEAC is? And then the last thing is actually something that Eric already mentioned, which is that we definitely want to recruit more SEAC members to join the mission subcommittee. So if this sounds interesting to you, we'd ask you to join and to just, help us brainstorm and think. And then for discussion notes, some of the questions we were asking ourselves were, do we want to provide a forum for people to give feedback to the elections department who are not on SEAC but are Dallas constituents? What is the mission values? Yeah, again, distinguishing between mission, vision, goals of the elections department as a whole, as opposed to SEAC, and kind of going back and forth between those two. And then something that also came up during our conversation was just to prioritize an equity lens as we have these conversations. So that was it. We really just spent our time defining what are we trying to accomplish together? And I guess there's not we didn't define a timeline for our work, so maybe there's a little bit less urgency because we don't have an election that we're looking to where, you know, we're submitting recommendations or anything like that. But if anybody on this call has any feedback on, you know, when they'd like to, I mean, we'll definitely give an update at our next meeting, but if there's any urgency or timeline recommendations, we're open to your feedback. Oh, and I guess Renato, you were on the subcommittee call. Do you want to add anything?
Thank you. No, I think you covered it very well. The major thing was, of course, that we were a committee of two with ex officio member, our chairman coming in as well, Eric Cedillo, and of course Marco Scarello giving us input as well. But we definitely felt that we would like to get more members involved in giving input. So I also want to reiterate that we urge any of you to join us. And it should be hopefully not a very difficult process, but something that we can all undertake together to create a mission, vision, and goal statement for our department and for our SEAC committee.
My only comment would be, keep in mind that the SEAC is a creation of Commissioner's Court. And so there's a charter that we went through, and that charter kind of talks about the roles. And said, I don't know if it's the formal mission, vision, and values, but in my opinion, I don't think we should spend too much time on that, because think about your job is to advise me on how to about the elections department. So that's my recommendation, is to really focus on that and don't worry as much about, you know, mission, visions, values for SEAC.
And we're all supposed to be overlooking the care and feeding of the voters. That's the bottom line too. So.
Anybody else? Okay, and I just wanted to add, I think, of course, the mission, I think the coordination between SEAC, which, in all honesty, this is my third year, some of you guys, this is new to you, and you're kind of wondering, you know, what are we supposed to be doing? How does this work? How do we help? I think there may be a situation where, in coordination with creating additional subcommittees, it might be helpful. Speaking the in-between times when Michael comes to us and asks us, help us with this, help us with that. Well, have we been thoughtful, you know, during that interim phase? Have we gotten together? Have we developed these subcommittees to truly have a back and forth conversation in terms of what our charter is, what our bylaws allow us to do, what they suggest perhaps us to do, and what we should be doing? In the last 2 years, I'll be real honest with you, I haven't felt that I've contributed much to SEAC. And I think other members who've been doing this for a little while, they feel the same way. I think this is a prime opportunity for all of us to take what we've been charged with and do what we can to ensure that Michael is, one, doing a bang-up job. He's moving towards efficiency, and I think all of us can respect that. We're looking at things from an equity lens. That's to be utilized and respected. But if we're not doing the work and we're not providing through these, I think, subcommittees, we can have these wonderful conversations in the back and forth, but nothing really changes. So we want to do it on behalf of the citizenry, I think, of Dallas County. Give it to Michael and let him respond. Okay? I think that is our charge. So when I talk about SEAC and the mission and the vision, I think that needs to be outlined to a certain extent as well. So what can we be doing? So I would encourage everyone to read through the bylaws, the charter that has created SEAC through the Commissioner's Court, and see what we are really charged with, so that we don't have the, well, I'm not sure about this, I'm not sure if I want to join that subcommittee. So let's commit. I know you guys are all here, all of us are here for a reason. We were asked to join this, and I think, of course, I know all of us are taking it seriously, but I feel like we can do more. I think we really should be doing more. So let's see if we can't make that happen. With that said, are there any current possibilities for new subcommittees that people think we should perhaps have? We've heard the conversation tonight the back and forth about some of the things that may be concerning to Michael in terms of what's happening. I think I heard some concerns about what's going on with differences in terms of potential vote center sites, maybe an inconsistency in how we're dealing with things. So these are all part and parcel of the possibility of something that we can address, but we first have to identify it. So are there any perhaps suggestions at present for additional subcommittees that can take on certain issues? Anyone?
Yes. This is Camila, and for me, it's voter turnout.
A voter turnout?
Yeah, like increasing support, even, I guess, even the fact that we anticipated 9% for the November 2021 election and got 6%, or that early vote was, half of what was anticipated, I think, something like that. And that Dallas continues to be ranked pretty low on voter turnout for elections. I think that could be an idea for a subcommittee to help figure out how to communicate that elections are happening when it's not a popular or sexy election.
I would have a serious problem with us getting into voter turnout. I don't think that's part of our responsibility. The process, not getting voters to the polls. So that we've got parties and campaigns that do that.
Let's look at that. Let's look at our bylaws specifically. I think everyone really should try to read through them, see what it is we're charged with, and what we can do. What is our mission in terms of what's there? I don't think we're going to be taking, this is kind of, if we don't do it in this meeting, it's difficult to do in terms of me sending out an email and being careful that we don't have a quorum violation. So I want these to be kind of some things that we talk about perhaps, and then later on talk about the possibility of voting on additional subcommittees in our next meeting. So we hear you, Camila. Lawrence, I think you had mentioned something about technology. Tell me a little.
Maybe election sites is something that, Michael, you might like help on looking at the categories and look at the requirements. What's a model voting site? What are the attributes and things like that?
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes, Lavetta Levels. I like the initial conversation with the earlier conversation regarding online voting. And I think that making some recommendations and taking steps toward, that's a 2 to 5 year goal possibly, but it won't happen until we make it a priority, until we make it a focus, and make it a goal. And so I think online voting should be a focus. In addition, I would like to see a committee that's looking at the joint agreement with the municipal governments and the school districts, reviewing that to understand and to see if we can somehow improve on that agreement between the two entities.
Okay. Anybody else? Michael?
Can I ask you a question? What were your concerns on that last one?
The agreement?
Yes.
I think that there's an opportunity for improvement, and I think that's the goal of the subcommittees, is to point out the areas where there can be improvement, and I think the joint agreement is one of them. I believe that the entities feel like they are at the liberty of the county, and that they don't have a lot of input, and that they don't have the chance to make changes that they feel. They don't have the autonomy. And I'm not sure that autonomy is a goal, but I know that the municipalities and the school districts feel like they don't have any input on the agreement, that the agreement is just countywide. You sign it and that's it. And there's not an opportunity to make changes, to give input, and to make it more specific for each individual entity, because they're all different.
Well, just to explain though, remember that a joint election, we have a May joint election, for instance, and that we will be meeting with the entities probably the end of January to kind of talk about that and present the contract. And it's a contract. We contract with those entities, and we negotiate. what they want us to do for that election. I know that, I think maybe where you're going with some of this is that last year, that wasn't a pleasant experience because I had to be the one that was the bearer of bad news.
They were blindsided by the cost.
They were blindsided by the costs that were thrust upon me, frankly, because we had a new price list for the equipment that we bought 2 years earlier that we didn't develop a price list yet. And so we did that. We had the increased cost for poll workers. The cost went from $12 to $18 and $16 because of COVID. We had a new formula that was implemented for the first time since vote center. It should have been implemented in 2019, but never was, to distribute costs in the vote center model. And there was one other thing. And so what we did in response to, so the costs were way higher than in the past. And so in response, what we did is I told them during those meetings, I will do everything in my power to lower those costs. And of course, I was the new guy in town, and they don't know me from Adam, so they don't know if I'm full of it or not. And so there was a lot of like, wow, these prices are high.
The new sheriff of town is expensive.
Right. And none of them were, not a single one was my decision, by the way. They were all decisions that were thrust upon me, and they were for good reason. We needed new equipment. We needed to pay poll workers. I'm not blaming anybody. It is what it is. And so what we did, though, is we tightened our belts. So we projected $4.6 million election for the May election. It ended up being $2.9 million. So those jurisdictions that thought that the prices were going to be so high, because we changed the way we do business and we got efficient and did a lot of things differently, it ended up being much, much, much cheaper than they thought. And a lot of them ended up getting refunds and everything.
Yes, and I appreciate that explanation. That's very important for everyone to understand that process. And while I do agree with that, I think it's more foundational than just the pricing. I think it's more about understanding the real options there. I think that the governmental entities again feel that they have no authority and no power in that agreement. Let's take the finances off of it. The timing, we know there's some things that can be negotiated, some things that can't be negotiated. But I do believe that there is an opportunity for better communication and better understanding between the county elections department and each governmental entity. And I think it probably goes to the people that are actually communicating. So I think if there was an opportunity to review the agreement annually to ensure understanding, I know that is done with typically clerks or a variety of named representatives from each entity, but I think that there can be an opportunity for improvement. If it's not a priority this year, that's okay. We know that we can't get it in for this year, and that's not always a goal. We know that sometimes goals are a year, 2 years out. So while we may not be able to get that accomplished immediately, I think it may be an opportunity for the elections department to make an attempt to bridge with the governmental entities. And yes, the financial situation was a disaster, and some of the entities walked away having less amounts than what they previously projected. That's great, but it's beyond the finance. It's a relationship, and when you don't take the time to nurture and to communicate effectively with those persons that you are having business with, long term, it can end up into the catastrophe of what we just experienced with the finance side.
Can I just add one other thing to that? And I appreciate everything you're saying. Along those lines, that's part of one of the reasons that in our reorg, we've added, Esmeralda's group and Laura's group, the communications group, is expanding greatly. We added 3 positions. We added a customer service position that's already on board. We've got a new communications manager that's going to oversee that group. In fact, he starts next Monday. I announced his name's Nicholas Solorzana. And Nicholas is chief of staff for a city councilman in Austin. He grew up in Dallas, and he went to UT Austin and has been there ever since. But he's coming back home, and he's going to be with us as the communications manager. But in addition to him, so he's going to be helping with these outreach efforts. But in addition to him, we've created a position that we're tentatively calling the district relations manager. It's basically the person who is that single person, that go-to person for all of these entities, cities, school districts, et cetera. Because here's what happens now. It's like that city secretary calls and they got to talk to person A for this, person B for that, person C for something else, and person D for someone. And it's I mean, we've all experienced it, right? Oh, you're calling the wrong guy. You got to call back this other number. And it's just frustrating. And so what we want is that single person to be that liaison to those people so that there's always someone to answer their phones and to keep that relationship open on a constant basis. And so we're hoping to address that. And so I think it's a point well taken.
Just a point of information.
I appreciate you capturing that because I think it is more about entity liaison relations. I think that's really what it is about. So if a committee can be formed along that line around entity relations and communication, I would like that. Thank you.
Lawrence?
I was just going to say, point of information also, there are liaison managers in the commissioners' court districts that deal with the cities on a routine basis. So maybe they need to be engaged differently with regard to elections. So.
Eric, you had mentioned something about a quorum. Do we have to have a quorum in the subcommittee?
Oh, we can have a quorum on it. That's the issue.
Can or
Yeah, we cannot. We cannot have. Yeah, we can't have 7 in our subcommittees. Otherwise, we're quorum for this group. So just anything under 7. 6, I think, our subcommittees are fine.
Okay.
I had a suggestion for subcommittee. It's something that I think would be very helpful to me. Voter registration is a very important part of what our office does. On the one hand, we should be very aggressively register people to vote, making it easier for them to vote, making it easier for them. And so we have VDRs, and Esmeralda's already done a fantastic job of that. But there's other methods to expand voter registration. And so I think that a subcommittee that would help us provide advice as far as that voter registration outreach, et cetera, would be very helpful. On the other hand, we're also charged with keeping our voter registration list clean. And I know that there's a lot of questions, probably more than anything else, about how do we do that? How do we make sure that we're as efficient as possible and that we don't have dead people on our rolls and that sort of thing? And there's, on the one hand, there's some people are suspicious that we're not doing it, and then there's some other people that are suspicious that we're doing it too much. So what would be helpful is that to have this subcommittee play that role to help communicate to say, yeah, we've looked through their procedures. They're doing A, B, C, D to keep things clean, and they're not doing D, F, and F to go overreach. And they're also doing good voter registration outreach. And so it's, doing as much as we can to expand, but also doing what we're supposed to be doing to make sure that we're in compliance with the law. Because one of the new things in SB1 is that if we're not in compliance with our voter registration maintenance, we can be held out of, and we can lose state funds. So that's an area that I've got a lot of ideas on voter registration, but I think getting the citizens' input on it would also be helpful.
Anyone else? Did you want to add anything else, Michael? Or that pretty much it? Okay.
Can I just ask and see if my staff did anything that we should have mentioned? Ready?
Okay, so at this time, we'll move to public comment. Anybody want to?
I do have an item on the one to bring kind of housekeeping. Michael, you talked about, seeking some form of identification. Are there plans to provide us access to acquiring election department badges like selected volunteers receive? Public officials.
I'd have to talk that over with our, I can tell you this, that the county as a whole is going through a major security review, and the elections department is continuing its security review, so some of that access, et cetera, that's, above my pay grade. So, but I will certainly bring it up, because we gotta work through the county on the access levels and all that. But we can add that to our.
Yes, some of the protocols too. Here's someone's badge that expires January 2023. That's, if they're not working, why would they have access?
Okay, so at this time, we will move to public comment. Anybody from the public wishes to comment? Yes, sir.
And then also involved in elections, election judge, poll watcher, or count poll watcher. Last. I can understand the potential to join primary for this time. As a taxpayer, homeowner, business owner in Dallas County, I personally would be not in favor of joining elections. This time, I think the parties ought to conduct their own primary. Not saying it's not something really good to consider and try down the road, but that's just my personal opinion. On that subject, that would be my position. I'd like to express that. Learned a lot. I think this CEAC maybe is a good thing. I guess business owner 38 years in Dallas County. Mission statement is always on it. Has Dallas County elections ever had a mission statement? Because I think an election is really three simple words: fair, honest, and transparent. That's what an election ought to be. From being involved, that is part of the Dallas County problem. Not been a feeling. Now, 15 years, 16 years, that has occurred. And when you have that feeling, that leads to all this other problems. I've seen the problems of the space in some of the polling locations, way too crowded. Those places need to be looked at, thought through, accommodating, so that the election workers can do their job, but the poll watchers can do their job too. And I think Michael's making some good strides that those are two, they've been in the election code law of Texas, I think, from the very beginning. Poll watchers, in fact, I know it has been. And they're supposed to not be adversarial. And so that definitely needs improvement, but a lot of those things are what causes that. that situation. But when you in a room so small that there's no room for the poll watcher to walk behind election workers and watch and listen to what's going on, the poll watcher cannot do their job. And I've been both. I've been election worker, been clerk, election judge, and I've been poll watcher. So I can appreciate both sides of it. Those are just a couple things that I would like to say. I do, with caution of this committee, is it appears to me, maybe I'm not understanding correctly, is an advisory to Michael as our elections administrator for the county. And you're not supposed to be what the parties do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Slick. Any other public comment? Absolutely.
Just so you know, there is a current mission statement. It's rather long and doesn't follow, it's not a traditional mission statement. So what we were looking to do is more of a traditional mission vision. And that's what the charge of make that right.
Mission statements typically should be brief and clear.
Anyone else?
Yes, that's Paul Heller. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've got decades of experience in all capacities, from voter to clerk to judge and central count, presiding judge. I thought this was a very well organized meeting and very fruitful for my ability to listen in. I do have some additional information that I'll share, I guess, with Michael. Some relates to advice I've gotten regarding the new poll watcher statements in the new law, and also some direct experience regarding the Secretary of State online portal, some conflicting information between the judge's ruling on how online should work, and that's based out of the TCRP lawsuit, and the information in their FAQ, and their response to some specific questions I asked. And I'll share those with you, but they're remarkably conflicting as to what happens between when a voter moves from one county to another. And I think it's urgent to make sure there is consistency and clarity. I've also been working with League of Women Voters lately, and they are very interested and active in electoral procedure, and I'm sure they would love to see citizen participation in issues related to registration and purging and all of the processes that go on with registration. And I'll follow up on each of those. Thank you for having remote access to this. And thank you, Michael, for taking so many steps in what appear to be good direction.
Can I just, we had a volume issue. Can you repeat your name? We didn't hear it at the beginning.
My name is Paul Heller, H-E-L-L-E-R.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eller. Anyone else want to make public comment? If not, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved.
We have a second.
Second here. Renato de los Santos seconds.
Thank you, Ray. Vote. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, bye.
Great meeting. Good night.
Happy holidays, guys.
Yes.
Merry Christmas.